Welcome to Law You Should Know. The law affects every aspect of our lives, our home, our jobs, and our recreational activities. Now you can learn about the law and how to protect yourself against the loss of your liberty or property. Learn how to stand up for your rights and seek compensation when you have been wronged. Your host for Law You Should Know is attorney Kenneth J. Landau with the Mineola law firm of Shane, Dox, Denisi, and Corker. He's a member of the Committee on Professional Ethics of the Bar Association of Nassau County and counsel to the Nassau Academy of Law. And now, here is your host for Law You Should Know, attorney Kenneth J. Landau.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome to Law You Should Know. Today we'll be talking about becoming a lawyer, and that's the title of a new book written by the assistant dean and also a law professor at Fordham Law School in Manhattan, and she's also oversees the international and non-JD programs at Fordham Law School. Toni, welcome to Law You Should Know.
Thank you so much, Ken. A pleasure to be with you.
Before you tell us some of the interesting details and information you cover in your book that will be of interest to everyone, what prompted you to write this book at this time on becoming a lawyer?
Ken, I've been working with law students and with attorneys for decades. And year after year, time after time, I see, even among incredibly bright attorneys, really talented people who have degrees from some of the best law schools in the country, a range of persistent deficits and shortcomings. And I sort of started to think about them in a disciplined way, and it's those shortcomings that I wrote about in this book, dealing mostly with professionalism.
And aside from lawyers, are these shortcomings in other professions and as well?
Yes. In fact, as I wrote the book, when I started writing the book, I thought this is going to be a book for lawyers and law students. But as I wrote the book, I realized that this book could be a really useful guide for any student or any professional, because I think so many of these shortcomings are things that all of us experience over time and really could benefit anyone.
And if someone follows your ideas or the accepts your guidance, they can be more successful and probably a happier lawyer or other professional. That's
exactly the idea, and I hope that's the case.
And what are some of the deficits, if you can just give us an overview?
Yeah, so they'll, of course, vary from person to person, but they include things like being organized, being timely, being proactive, taking responsibility when you make a mistake, being resourceful, being adaptable. I also write quite a bit, and I was surprised myself at how much social sciences research I did in writing this book. Things like having a positive mindset, being optimistic, are really, really important elements of a strong professional persona. Committing yourself to excellence, being creative, being adaptable. These are some of the topics that I discuss in the book.
And are these concepts dealt with in, let's say, college or high school, or better in other cultures, or are these have nothing to do with someone's ability to go to an Ivy League school or succeed in college or before?
Yeah, Ken, that's a great question. And as far as I could tell, they are not dealt with. And many people that go to Ivy League and other prestigious colleges and law schools probably never come across a lot of these topics. As far as I know, they're not really taught anywhere effectively. And I think that's why so many people, including very talented people, suffer from a lot of these shortcomings. They're not things that traditional education seems to place a real premium on, and I'm hoping that will change a bit.
And are there things unique to the legal profession that bring out the that exaggerate or enhance these problems?
That's a great question. So, Ken, you and I are both trained as lawyers, so we know that that process exaggerates a lot of bad qualities sometimes. But I think law school does exaggerate some unfortunate qualities, in part because of the enormous strain that lawyers face and the enormous pressure. But I think that those are pressures that are faced by just about every professional and every student and every employee these days.
Right. I mean, the only difference to me is that when you go to a doctor or accountant or a dentist, usually it's a win-win situation. In our legal system, especially in litigation, if it's something going to litigation, it's usually a win-lose situation. Someone's trying to make you lose. And I'm not sure you have that pressure or the same dynamics in another profession.
That's a really interesting insight, and I think you might be onto something there. And that's why I think we've seen in the legal profession a real lack of civility. And I think the nature of the practice has declined in recent years in the sense that people are less civil, people are less polite. People do see legal disputes very often as sort of a win-lose situation. And I think that's really unfortunate. And civility is one of the topics I address in the book, and I think it's a very, very important and a very, very understated or misunderstood element of being a fine lawyer.
And I would agree, from my courtroom experience and dealing with many other lawyers over the years. And how much has the practice of law changed over the years that you've been studying it and teaching it?
The practice of law has changed dramatically. So I studied, I practiced law in the 1980s, and I think if I were to go back to the kind of practice I engaged in, which I think for the time was very typical, it would have very, very little resemblance to what we see today. So one of the things I notice is that the practice is far more competitive today than it ever was before. Clients are demanding more for less. They have many more choices in terms of the providers of legal services. Lawyers used to have a monopoly over the provision of legal services, and that has changed. And, of course, technology. So when I was practicing law in the 1980s, we didn't even have email yet. Now we have email. Now we have conference calls. Now we have artificial intelligence. Now we have computers doing discovery and creating contracts and doing a lot of the things that junior lawyers commonly did years ago.
And I don't know if it's covered in your book, but we also have outsourcing. So the lawyer in the United States is competing against the lawyer who might be working for a lot less in India or somewhere else.
That's exactly right. That's another major change that we're seeing, and that's all part of this trend towards unbundling legal services. In the old days, someone would come into your office and they had a litigation matter or they had a business deal, and the lawyer's office handled it from soup to nuts. And I think now clients are shopping around different elements of their legal needs, and a big part of that is outsourcing, absolutely.
And also the legal areas of law may become more complex and more specialized. Just as you wouldn't go to one doctor to treat all your problems, lawyers by practice or by training have become a little more specialized. Absolutely.
And I just read an article earlier this week about how there is so much pressure on young lawyers to specialize earlier and earlier. Clients are refusing to pay for the work of most junior associates until they actually know something. And so firms and clients are putting pressure on lawyers earlier and earlier in their careers to specialize. And I think that's another very, very important trend. I'm glad you raised that.
And sometimes, as I would say it's a newer trend, but sometimes lawyers or law students work as a paralegal for a period of time before they make the decision to go to law school or work as an intern in a law firm, so they're not as green when they start the practice of law, like an apprentice program.
Yeah, I think that is something that we did, Ken, back in the day, but I think students are doing that more and more now. I think there are more and more opportunities, and law firms keep talking about wanting law graduates who are practice ready. And I think internships and apprenticeships and working as a paralegal and getting more exposure to the realities of the practice of law is a really great way for young people to better understand what's expected and be better prepared to deliver that.
And you're also addressing some of those soft skills that will help lawyers succeed and that law firms want. Teamwork, emotional intelligence, civility, and as I think I said before, teamwork.
Yes. And I think these are really important skills that law schools still do not focus on. And we could talk forever about why that may be, but the reality is that law schools do not put an emphasis on soft skills. And I've discovered through my work in researching and writing this book that those are the true differentiators of success.
And I think that's true for many other fields as well.
I agree, absolutely.
And so the person with the highest score or the top grades may not always be the top candidate for a position, because a law firm may want those soft skills as well, may want the complete package. I
think that's absolutely right. And I read a really interesting essay as I was preparing for the book, in which it said, if you're forget about IQ, forget about intelligence quotient. And when I was young, Ken, and probably when you were young, that was all anybody talked about. What's your IQ score? How high is your IQ? And that was considered to be sort of a really important determining factor of how far you would go in life. And what I read was, if you're smart enough to get through law school, you're smart enough. Differences in IQ above that don't really distinguish you as a good lawyer or a bad lawyer, as a successful person or as an unsuccessful person. It's the soft skills that you mentioned that are really the defining factors beyond that.
And also, I don't know if you would agree with this, but if let's say you're off the charts on the IQ scale, you may feel everyone's inferior to you, and their perspectives don't matter, and you're less flexible, and it's more difficult with their solutions and their work, and it's harder for you to work to be a team player.
That's a really great insight. And in writing this book, I had a lot of conversations with different lawyers, and I heard that theme over and over and over again. And one of the words that kept coming up was humility. And when I told people that I was putting a chapter in my book on humility, they thought I was crazy, because you don't think of lawyers and humility usually in the same sentence. But humility ultimately is about believing that you can learn something from somebody else. And if you did go through life thinking that you were so gifted that nobody could come close to you, you really lack that ability to be humble, and you lack that ability to listen to others, and you lack that ability to learn. And when I talk to lawyers, both at in-house and in government positions and in NGOs and at law firms, they all said they really wanted people who could learn and were open to learning. So I think you're absolutely right, Ken, that those sort of stellar academic credentials do not always translate into the best job opportunities.
And this is probably true for other fields and other professions as well.
I would think so, absolutely.
Because everyone's coming in from a different perspective, culturally, intellectually, by terms of their background, and maybe even other things, and together they can achieve a better product.
I think that's right. And Ken, I think that's one area in which younger people are better than we of an older generation. Generation Y and X seem to be much, much more collaborative than we were. I think we were sort of individualistic and maybe competitive in a certain way. I think younger generations tend to be more collaborative, and I think that if they can keep those collaborative skills as they enter the workforce, whether they're in the legal profession or something else, and they can really marshal those collaborative senses that they have and instincts, they'll do extremely well.
And really, being a lawyer is about problem solving and problem preventing, and it may take a variety of backgrounds and people to decide on a variety of solutions to solve a problem or prevent one.
I completely agree with that, and that's why inclusiveness is so important in law, in school, in any other context. Because the reality is, each of us sees the world through our own lens, and that lens is informed by our own history, our own backgrounds, our own unique characteristics. And that's another reason why humility is so important, because if I'm going to be a problem solver or a problem preventer, I really have to see a problem or a potential problem from multiple perspectives.
Right. And even if you don't agree with them, you have to look at it different ways.
And I think that's the key. I can disagree, but I can respectfully listen and try and understand it. And that, I think, is a real key to problem solving.
Where everyone may improve upon or modify the idea they just heard, and then it becomes a group project.
Exactly.
And you mentioned it briefly. Something new that lawyers are confronting, and maybe people in other fields as well, is AI. And it's rumored that AI can take over the role of judges and lawyers today in some contexts, and that's going to be the next big thing.
So that's what they say. Certainly, I've read a lot about AI as I was preparing for this book, and I wouldn't consider myself an expert, but this is what is predicted by people who I respect a lot. And Ken, when I think about AI and its potential, it makes me even more convinced that the elements of a professional persona are so important. If computers are going to be doing much of the legal work, what's really going to differentiate legal professionals and other professionals is these soft skills that you mentioned earlier.
So, and it's so far it's one thing to teach AI skills, but it's not so easy to teach them soft skills.
True.
But perhaps they'll be part of the team.
True.
Okay, we're going to take a short break now. When we return, I'd like you to tell us some more about becoming a lawyer, and also some of the programs that you oversee at Fordham Law School in New York. We're talking with Toni Jaeger-Fine, who's a professor and assistant dean at Fordham Law School and oversees their international and non-JD programs. You're listening to Law You Should Know here on 90.3 FM and also over the internet at nccradio.org. We'll be back in a moment.
This portion of programming on WHPC is brought to you on behalf of the Nassau County Bar Association, who wants you to know about ADR, Alternate Dispute Resolution, which can help you avoid costly, lengthy, and uncertain litigation in court. By resolving disputes through mediation or arbitration, it gives you control over who decides your case. A mediator helps all parties to reach an agreement they can live with, or an arbitrator selected by the parties hears and decides the case. Your attorney can still represent you, but you control who decides your case. ADR is faster and less stressful than fighting in court, and it is a great way to resolve divorce, employment, or commercial disputes. ADR is now offered through the Nassau County Bar Association. Find out more about how ADR can help resolve your dispute by calling 516-747-4070 or visit nassaubar.org.
Once again, we continue with Law You Should Know. From the Mineola Law Firm of Shane, Dox, Denise, Corker, and Sauer, here is attorney Kenneth J. Landau.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome back to Law You Should Know. We're talking with Toni Jaeger-Fine. She's an assistant dean and also a professor of law at Fordham Law School in New York City and oversees their international and non-JD programs. Just to go back to ADR, I don't know if that's something that you cover in your book, and do you think that's an important tool for lawyers and law students and business people to be, and even consumers and clients to be aware of as they resolve legal matters?
Ken, I do, yes. ADR, I think, is really becoming more and more popular, and of course, alternative dispute resolution mechanisms covers a range of different ways of resolving conflict, but I do think that litigation is becoming, it's always going to be important, but a little bit less important than it once was compared to these other means of dispute resolution.
And at least it's one alternative out there.
I'm sorry?
At least it's one alternative still out there.
Exactly.
I know that you have knowledge over a lot of topics, and I just want to move through them quickly. Why is law a buyer's market? And how important are lawyer ratings?
So one of the reasons that I think law is a buyer's market is exactly because of ratings and the transparency that the internet provides. So consumers can now look up, sort of Google someone's name. They want to hire John Smith as a lawyer, and they Google John Smith lawyer in Mineola, New York, and they find what other people have said about him. And I think whether those ratings are legitimate or reliable or not, there's certainly something that consumers take into account. And they usually do, I would think, have a kernel of truth in them.
We've been talking about lawyer skills, but what are some of the tools of unconscious incompetence?
It's one of my favorite topics in the book. Years ago, a guy named Noel Birch came up with the idea of a competence matrix. And this matrix explains how we move from incompetence through a number of stages until we reach what's called unconscious competence. And that's a state at which we can do things more or less automatically. We don't have to think about them. We just do them. We don't have to exert time or energy. And the tools that we need to move from incompetence to competence include things like questioning, really deep, thoughtful questioning, reflection, sustained reflection about what we do, what we've done, how it could have been improved, observing and imitating others, and coachability. And coachability is sort of one of those buzzwords that you hear a lot about today. And for that reason, I hate to use it. But coachability really makes sense. It is about being truly open to learning and self-improvement.
And this could be by your bosses, by your colleagues, by your teachers?
Yes, all
by your
of the
experiences,
above.
right.
Anyone you admire. Anyone you admire. It could even be people that you know from a distance. So you could read about a particular lawyer or observe a particular lawyer in court or at a bar association activity and say, that is someone who I admire and respect. I want to take certain elements of his persona and incorporate them into my own.
And most of these people will be perfectly happy to share with them his or her secrets of success.
You know, one of the things I've found through my work over the decades is that people are really, really generous. Even when they're very, very busy, people really like to help other people, and people really love to help when you admire them, right? You go to someone and you say, gee, I really admire that lecture you gave, or I really admire the approach you took in a particular negotiation. Could we talk? Could I learn a little bit more about how you developed such a manner? I think people are thrilled to share their successes and to mentor others.
And they'll probably be flattered that you're seeking out their ideas. And this applies to anyone for anything.
Anyone, anything. I know I would be flattered if someone came up to me and said, I admire this about your work. Can you tell me more? I think that's human nature.
It even, like Dale Carnegie used to say, even if you admired their dress or their signature or the handwriting, anything about them, that would open the door.
Absolutely.
And it's probably a good skill to have at work.
It's a great skill to have at work, and it's a great part of networking. So when you think of networking at its most basic form, it's really just about building relationships, the way we build all sorts of other kinds of relationships in our lives.
But you may not even see them again, but you'll have put have given them a good moment.
Absolutely.
And probably vice versa.
Absolutely. And there's nothing better, I think, than making someone feel good.
And there's certainly nothing bad about it. And tell us about the programs you oversee at Fordham.
Great. So, as you said, I work at Fordham Law School, and I oversee what's called the international and non-JD programs. That includes everything from master degrees and the doctoral degree that we have at the law school to study abroad programs for JD students, to an array of short-term programs that we offer for different constituencies.
And so are you offering legal education or training to non-lawyers?
We do, actually. We have a relatively new master degree. We have a long-standing master degree for those who already have a first degree in law, but we have a relatively new master degree for non-lawyers. And that's been something that's been really, really interesting. It turns out that lots of people want to understand and know more about the law. That's the whole point behind your program, Ken. But not to take a whole 3-year degree. They don't really need that. But they want to be able to understand legal issues, communicate with lawyers, and so we offer a 1-year master program for that purpose.
So in a sense, it's not an MBA, but it's an MLA, Master in Legal Administration.
It's an MSL, exactly, but it's very much the same thing.
And some of your students have become lawyers abroad, but they wish to be able to take the New York or another bar in the United States and have the credentials of being a New York or an American lawyer.
That's right. A lot of them do take the New York bar. Not every state allows them to take the bar with only the LLM, but New York does. And although many of them go home, many of my graduates stay here and work in all sorts of companies and law firms and NGOs and businesses, become entrepreneurs. So my students over the years are an incredibly interesting and diverse group of people.
And if they go back to their home country or somewhere else in the world, they will also do those same things in another environment.
Exactly. And some of them, when they go home, also become judges or politicians. So the world is their oyster.
And the business people that take your 1-year master program, what are some of those types of people, and what do they do with that training?
Most of them actually are interested in compliance. So corporate compliance has become a really big field, and we offer a master for non-lawyers in compliance. So you probably know, Ken, that you could become a chief compliance officer if you're a lawyer, but you can also become a chief compliance officer or work in compliance and really advance in that field, even if you are not officially a lawyer.
And
so
just so it's clear to our listeners, what do you mean by compliance?
Compliance is a field in which you work generally inside a company, a financial institution or another company, to ensure that the company has procedures and policies in place that allow them to comply with all government regulations.
And they're carrying out those processes.
Exactly.
So it doesn't lead to fines or regulatory action or litigation.
Right. So you've probably read in the newspaper over the past years just tremendous fines that have been levied against certain banks and other organizations, and this is exactly to avoid those kinds of fines.
And is it like risk management?
Risk management is a huge part of compliance,
okay.
Yes.
We just have a few seconds left. Give us contact information for anyone who wants to find out more about these programs at Fordham.
Absolutely, Ken. You can reach me at tfine@fordham.edu.
Okay. I would like to thank Toni Jaeger-Fine for being our guest on Law You Should Know. And you've heard about her book, Becoming a Lawyer, and she's also the author of many other books. And you have the email address for reaching her. It's tfine@fordham.edu. And if you've missed any part of this program, it's available as a free podcast by going to nccradio.org. And please join us at this same time next week here on 90.3 FM or at nccradio.org.